It was a beautiful day in the countryside. The fields of wheat were gold, and the oat fields were green. Out in the meadows were stacked up bales of hay, and the stork on his big long red legs was mincing about, chattering in his Egyptian language, for that's what he was taught when he was young. And out beyond the fields and the meadows were the vast forest lands with their hidden lakes. And in the midst of all that was an overlord's manor. It was large and beautiful, and surrounding it was a clear water moat. And from the walls of his house, running down the hillside into next to the water, was a thicket of burdock bushes that stood so high that they were soared up as high as a child. And down below their big green leaves, it was as if it was a wilderness all of its own. And down there underneath the thick shadows was a duck, and she was sitting on her nest trying to hatch her ducklings out. It was long and tedious work, dull business for someone who had to sit there day in and day out without hardly any visitors. For all the other ducks, well, they preferred being out in the moat, swimming around, or up in the barnyard just chatting about. No one would rather be down squatting underneath the burdocks, gossiping with her. So there she sat. But in time, crack, the eggs under her began to hatch, and peep, peep, out come the fluffy little creatures. And the mother duck said, quack, quack, and as quick as that, they came tumbling out from under her into the underworld of the burdocks. And they said, wow, Mother, this is a big wide world compared to being in our little eggs. And the mother said, this is nothing. The world extends far beyond this, way out beyond the fields and beyond the garden. I've never been out that far, but it's a big wide world. And she stood up to join her little ducklings when she noticed underneath her, why, there was still a big egg that hadn't been hatched. Oh dear, she said, how long is this one going to take? She sat back down on her nest and letting her little ones just play amongst the leaves, for the green was good on their eyes. And she carried on. An old duck come by to pay her a visit, and he said, how is it today? Oh, I'm doing really well, she said. Most all my ducklings have been hatched out, but this one here just wants to take a little longer. She said, but look at all my other little chicks. Oh, aren't they the cutest things you ever did see? They all take after their father. Oh, the wretch. He hasn't even come by once to visit me. The old duck said, let me have a look at that egg. I think I know what kind of egg that big one is. That's probably a turkey egg. I was fooled by that once myself. Oh, those turkey children were such a trouble. They were afraid of water. It didn't matter how much I hissed and snapped at them, it was of no use. Could I have a look there? Why, sure, she said. She stood up, and the old duck said, yeah, it certainly is. That's a turkey egg if I ever saw one. If I were you, I'd leave it alone and be off and tend to your own children. But the mother duck, she said, sat back down on the egg. Well, I don't mind, she said. I'll sit here a little longer. I've already sat here this long. Might as well sit another few days. Suit yourself, he said, and off he waddled. Well, soon the big, large egg cracked. Peep, peep. Out came the young'un, and the mother duck stood up and watched him, quite happy and relieved that all of them had been hatched. Why, he's so much bigger and gangular and uglier than the other chicks that I hatched out. Maybe he is a turkey, she thought. Well, we'll find out soon enough. But if he doesn't get in the water, I'll shove him in myself. The next day was a splendid day. The sun was out and shined down on the leaves, and the mother duck led her little ducklings down to the moat for their first swim. Splash! She jumped in. Quack, quack, she said, come on, jump in. And each of the little ducklings took the plunge. Splash, splash, splash. At first the water come up over their head, but soon enough they were all bobbing about and paddling as if they'd done it their whole lives. And even the big ugly one was. That's not a turkey, the mother duck said. Look at the way he's using his feet. Look how he holds himself straight up like that. Yeah, he's my son. And if you look at him properly, he's even a little handsome. Quack, quack, she said, come along. I'll take you over to the duck yard and show you around. But, she said, stay next to me close, because so you don't get stepped on, and keep an eye out for the cat. They got over to the duck yard, and everything was in an uproar. There were two families fighting over an eel there, but in the end the cat ran off with it. That's the way of the world, she said to her chicks, licking her bill, wishing she had a little bite of that eel. Come along, she said, I'll show you the most noble duck of all here. See that big old fat duck up there with the red band around his leg? Well, that's the highest honor that a duck can receive here. That just means that the people here really pay that duck extra attention and care for it extra well. They don't want to lose that one. So off they waddled, sauntered on their way, all in a line, and the mother stopped. No, no, she said, don't be walking like that with your toes in. No well-bred duck walks like that. Keep your toes pointed out, like the way I'm doing it here. And all the ducks did as they were told. While they walked up to the big old fat duck, all the other ducks in the duck yard just started really talking rudely. What do we need another procession of ducks for? Look at this brood. It's big. I think we have enough ducks here. Especially that queer-looking one over there. We're not standing for that one. One of them charged up to the ugly duckling and nipped him on the neck. Leave him alone, his mother said. He hasn't done anybody harm. Well, maybe not, but he's so big and ugly. He deserves a good whacking. When they got up to the big, fat, honorable duck, the duck said, why, look at your children. They're so polite and well-trained. All except that one there. That one there must have come out a little awkward. I'll bet you wish you could hatch him out again. Well, that isn't possible, the mother duck said, but even though he's a little ugly, he does still swim. I dare say that he might even swim better than the others. Maybe with age he'll grow to be a little more attractive. And then she, with her bill, began to just careen the duck. Besides, she said, he's a drake, and looks don't matter so much as long as he's strong. I believe he'll amount to something. Well, the others are pretty enough, the big duck said. You're welcome to stay here. Make yourself at home. But if you see a big eel's head around here, bring it to me. Well, the new brood did make themselves at home, and they felt welcome by the other ducks, except for the ugly one. The ugly duckling was teased and tormented by everybody, it seemed. While the ducks nipped him and the chickens pecked him, one day the big old Tom Turkey puffed up so big he was like the sails of a giant ship, and he bore down on that little duck till he gobbled and turned beet red in the face. And the little duckling was terrified, ran away to his mother. And things didn't get better for him. Why, things went bad to worse. I didn't know where he could go for safety. He was made the laughing stock of the whole barnyard. Even his own brothers and sisters began to taunt him, saying, well, we wish the cat would get you. And even the barnyard girl kicked him around. One day his own mother, she said, you're such a trouble around here. I wish you were a mile away. So one day he ran away. And with all his might, he flew up over the barnyard fence out into the wild fields. Kind of just crashed down in the grass next to a bush where some sparrows were, and all at once the sparrows flew off. Oh, that must be because I'm so ugly, he thought. He waddled himself on through the grass. When he was very weary and tired, he finally reached a marsh where the wild ducks lived. And he just nestled down in some of the reeds there, and being so weary and disheartened, he fell asleep. And he, all night long, that's where he was. And the next morning, some wild drakes come by just to see who the newcomer was. And he come out and he held his head up high and quacked just like his mother had taught him. The drake said, oh, you're so ugly. Why? It doesn't matter so much that you're ugly, but you shouldn't be around our daughters. We'd hate to have you mess up our gene pool. Oh, my goodness, the little duckling said, I wasn't even thinking of marriage. Why, all I wanted was to lay and just lie about here in the reeds, get a little drink from the marshes once in a while. He swam away, and he stayed there for 2 days when 2 big gander geese came in, and they were still young, almost out of the egg themselves. They were, because of that, a bit cocky, and they pretended to like him. They said, hello there, comrade. Why don't you come over to our marsh nearby here? We have some young lady geese to show you. Maybe you can hook up with one of them. But inwardly, they secretly wanted to watch him be rejected by those lady geese, for he was so ugly. And then bang, bang, gunshots went off. And those two gander geese fell dead in the water, and the water turned red. The, the little ugly duckling was frightened. He swam around in circles, not knowing which way to go, and a whole flock of ducks rose up out of the pond, and then a whole volley of shots went off. Bang, 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 boom! It seemed as if the whole lake was surrounded by hunters in their camouflage, just lying in wait to attack him. He was so terrified he froze still when he could hear some bird dogs splashing around in the reeds. Splash, splash, splash. One of them come face to face to him, his big tongue lolled out and his shiny teeth that looked like they would hurt if they bit you. Nose going from this way and that way, sniffing here and there. When he came right up to the little duckling, he stayed motionless, and then he turned and went the other way. It was at that moment that the little duckling thought, oh, it's a good thing I'm so ugly. Not even a dog wants me. Finally, the shooting stopped. The water became calm again. But he still did not dare leave the reeds, and he kept his head down under his wing, frightened. After several hours, he finally got up. He scurried away from that marsh, tried to get as far away from it as possible. He was so afraid. But the wind started to blow, and while he was running through the fields, he could hardly stand up. It was blowing so hard. He came to an old shack of a cottage. It didn't look like why it probably would have fallen down if it could decide which way to fall. One of the doors on the shack had a hinge that was broken, which made it possible for him to squeeze through the little crack of an opening at the bottom of the door. He went inside into the darkness quietly. There he stayed the whole night to get out of the wind and cold. Next morning, when he got up, he found that the place belonged to an old woman, a cat, and a hen. The cat was called Sunny, and he could just arch his back and purr. He can even make electricity with his fur if you pet him just right. And the old hen, she had short, stubby legs, so she was called Chickie Short Legs. And Chickie could lay the most wonderful eggs. And the old lady, why, she loved those two as if they were her own children. The little duckling sat down in the corner quietly watching them, when the old lady, who didn't have a very good vision, noticed him. Looking at down there, what on earth is this? A big old fat duck, she said. What a catch. Why, we're going to have duck eggs now. If he's a drake, well, we'll give him a go and see. So the next several weeks, the ugly duckling stayed there with the cat and the old lady and the hen to see if he could lay some eggs. The cat of the house there thought he was the master, and the hen thought she was the mistress of the house. They always went around the yard there saying, "We and the world," went on jabbering about something, but as if they were half the world and the better half of it. The ugly duckling, when he thought a different opinion about that, the old hen said, "Can you lay eggs?" "No." "Well, then, I suggest you hold your tongue." And the cat said, "Can you arch your back and purr, or make sparks with your fur?" "No." "Well, then, I would not express your opinion when more sensible people are talking around here." The old duckling crawled up in his corner, feeling dejected. He felt lonely, and then he began to dream about the clear blue air and the warm sun. And then an urge came within him, almost instinctively, for the blue water. Oh, how he longed to be back in the water. He wanted to swim and dive. He felt so strongly about it, he shared that with the hen. And the hen said, "How absurd! What kind of... How do you get such notions in your head? Probably because you can't do anything. If you would learn to lay some eggs or purr, have some amusement for the old lady, why, you wouldn't get such notions." Little duckling said, "Well, it's such a pleasure to float in the water. So refreshing to have it just glide up over your head as you're diving to the bottom and back up again." The duck or the hen said, "That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. You should go talk to the cat. He's the wise and clever one here. Do you suppose he likes to dive in the water and swim about? Or how about the old lady? She's the wisest one in the world. Do you think she likes to swim and feel the cool water come up over her head as she dives to the bottom?" "You don't understand me," the ugly duckling said. "Why, we would understand you more than anybody would," the hen said. "Do you think you're wiser than the cat and the old woman? How conceited are you?" The old hen said, "Why, you ought to be more grateful for your circumstances here. Give thanks to the Maker that you even found this place in the state that you were in, and to have such good friends as us to show you what's what. But no, you're probably such a numbskull you don't even recognize it. Well, I know the truth is hard and difficult to take, but you really need to lay some eggs and provide some kind of amusement for the old woman, or you're really not much worth around here." The ugly duckling then said, "I don't belong here. I'm going to go to the marsh." And so away he went, leaving the hen and the cat and the old woman. He went back to the marsh and he swam about and he dived, despite the fact that the other wild ducks slighted him, dished him. Autumn came, and the wind started to blow the brown and yellow leaves around, and the clouds filled with snow covered the blue sky, and the black raven sat on the fence line. "Caw, caw," it called. The whole landscape became a shiver. And one day, in the sunset in all its splendor, some strange-looking giant birds emerged out of the reeds and glided out to that little pond. They were the most magnificent and beautiful things that this little duck had ever seen before. Their plumage was dazzling white, and they were so graceful. Their necks were long, and graceful. They were swans. And when they unfurled their large, strong wings, and they flew into the air with the strangest cry, it brought a strange feeling into him, giddiness and excitement. He started to go around in circles, craning his neck, watching those beautiful creatures in the sky rise higher and higher and higher until they flew off for warmer countries. He was so beside himself that he dived down into the lake to the bottom and then up again. And he said, I can never forget those birds, those magnificent. I have never loved anything like I love them. Well, the winter went on, and it was becoming very cold. Jackie Frost started to freeze the little marsh, and it became so cold that he had to swim about here and there to keep himself from freezing in the water. But each day, the ice started to creep more and more in, and the little circle of water he had to swim in got smaller and smaller. The ugly duckling worked very hard every day, keeping his legs a-moving so he wouldn't freeze, but he eventually was treading wearied out, and he became exhausted. He just gave up, it seemed. And that night, his legs froze in the water. The next morning, he was fortunate that a good farmer had come by and noticed him. The farmer went out onto the lake, and with his wooden shoe, he knocked him out, so he was free once again. The farmer picked him up, as he could hardly move, carried him to his home, to his wife, where they warmed him up, gave him a bit to eat to help him recover. He did, and when the children started wanting to play with him, he thought they were trying to hurt him and be mean to him. He flapped around and knocked the milk pail down and spilled all over the floor, and the farmer's wife began to fling her arms about and shriek, which made him even more frightened. He jumped up in the butter pail, and the kids were laughing and tumbling around trying to catch him when he flew right into the flour bin, and the flour puffed up like billowing clouds of smoke. Luckily, the doorway was open, and he flew out the door. There was a blanket of new fallen snow. He made his way to an old cave. To get out of the cold, he stayed there for the winter. And the pain and the suffering that he had to endure during that long, cruel winter is beyond words. It's unspeakable to the human tongue. But he managed to survive. And in the springtime, the sun did come back up again, and it thawed out the marsh, and the lark began to sing, and the little duckling felt an urge to fly. He unfurled his wings. They felt much larger and much stronger, and with a strong stroke, he lifted himself up off the ground, and with each strong stroke, carried himself higher and higher. he felt so strong and vigorous that he flew off to another land, far away. It was a beautiful land, a garden with flowers, orchards in full bloom, and there was a beautiful crystal clear river that ran down between them, that along its banks grew the beautiful purple lilac flower. He landed down in the plush green grass next to the flowering trees. He could smell the scented fragrance of the flowers when he saw 3 beautiful swans emerge from a thicket. He recognized them at once as they glided into the river so peacefully and with great dignity. But an overwhelming sadness came up inside of him, because the thought occurred to him that if he dared to even go near them, they would kill him. And so he stayed back, as he was so ugly. But as he sat there, the courage to go and face these birds, to face his death, grew. For he thought that, why, it was better to die at their hands than to be nipped at by the ducks and pecked at by the chickens, run around by the girl, or shot at by the hunters, or have to endure such a terrible winter. What's worse? So he flew over, and he landed himself in the river, not far from those 3 beautiful swans, and they glided over to him. He lowered his head, and he said, "Kill me." And as he did so, he gazed upon his image in that crystal clear water as it mirrored his reflection back at him. And what he saw was unexpected. He was not the dirty, gray, clumsy, ugly little dirty duckling any longer. He was a swan, just like the beautiful white swans he had seen earlier. How could this be, he thought. It occurred to him that, despite the fact he had been born in the duck yard, he was born from a swan's egg. And those beautiful 3 swans came up to him. They did not nip him and tease him or taunt him, but he came up and careened him with their bills. And then not long after that, some children came down, and they brought some cake and bread to feed them. And one of the little girls, she said, "Look, there's a new one." And the others rejoiced and said, "A new one has come." And they clapped their hands, and they skipped and danced back to their home to get their parents. And when they come back to the pond, they all agreed that the big new comer was the most handsome of all. And those other swans, 3 old swans, bowed their heads in honor of the new one. Well, the new swan was very bashful. He had not had so much attention before. He stuck his head under his wing. And the thought occurred to him how strange it was that just days before he was ridiculed and scorned as the most ugly bird of all, And now he was being adored and hailed as the most beautiful one. And he thought, I'm very happy and glad that I had experienced all that suffering and misery through my life. For had I not, I wouldn't have had a full understanding of the good fortune and the beauty that I now have. At that moment, with humility and dignity, took his head from his wing, and he lifted it up high into the air, and let out a cry. He said, I I never knew the great happiness that I would once have when I was a ugly duckling. The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen.